What would you do if the most powerful woman in your family was turning the legacy of your lineage into a business pitch deck? What if your late grandmother's crown, your nation's sacred symbols, and the titles handed down from generations were now casually being leveraged for book tours, brand launches, and Netflix thumbnails? And what if the person doing it had once stood beside you in the church aisle, smiling politely, but now you barely recognize her? That's the gut-punch decision Prince William just made. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. And it definitely wasn't without tears, Meghan's specifically. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because this wasn't just a polite royal no. This was a full legal shutdown. The kind that echoes through public records, trademarks, and international headlines. For the first time since the Sussexes stepped back, Prince William has drawn a line, and he didn't use a press release to do it. He used a lawyer, and it worked. But how did it come to this? Why now, after years of tension, press battles, and a family fractured by royal drama, did William finally take formal action to block Meghan Markle from using the HRH title in any business capacity? More importantly, why did it leave her in tears? To understand the emotional stakes here, we have to rewind, not just to Megxit, but to something far more subtle and far more strategic, a pattern that's been building quietly beneath the surface. It's not what Meghan said in interviews. It's what her team filed behind closed doors. Trademark attempts, branding blueprints, silent signals that she wasn't just walking away from royalty, she was repackaging it. And William noticed. At first, he said nothing. The palace remained quiet. The family maintained their dignified silence, as the late Queen so often prescribed. But silence can't last forever, because behind that silence, there was a boiling point. It wasn't just one move by Meghan. It was dozens. Strategic, calculated, designed to position herself as a royal-adjacent figure without the responsibilities, but all the perks. And somewhere between the Netflix series, the Spotify fallout, the children's books, and the glossy magazine features, William decided enough. No more HRH. Not in business. Not in branding. Not even by implication. And when the letter was sent, stamped with royal authority, it was like a bolt of lightning through Montecito. For Meghan, it wasn't just a letter. It was a door slamming shut. Now here's where it gets tricky, and yes, deeply emotional. Because Meghan had always said she didn't care about titles. Remember? The interviews, the quotes, the subtle digs at the monarchy. I don't need a title to be of value. I'm just Meghan. But the legal filings told another story. The HRH title, while technically not in active use, remained on the table in certain documents, in ways that weren't outright illegal, but were murky. And William? He doesn't do murky. This story matters now more than ever, because it reveals a deeper shift in the royal family strategy and Prince William's leadership style. For years, he's played the long game. Stoic, cautious, strategic, letting the headlines swirl around him while remaining silent. But that era is over. This move wasn't just a legal block. It was a public declaration. William is no longer in the background. He's stepping forward. And Meghan? She may have underestimated how far he was willing to go. Because here's what most people don't realize. Meghan Markle's post-royal empire is built on implication, on suggestion, on soft power. She doesn't need to say she's HRH. All she has to do is remind people she was. The visual cues, the quiet title references, the subtle nods to her royal status in every deal, every introduction, every carefully worded press release. It's clever. It's effective. It's legally ambiguous. Until now, William's decision cuts through that ambiguity. It says, we see what you're doing, and we're not letting it slide. But what pushed him to finally act? Was it the Netflix docuseries that dragged his wife and children into the spotlight? Was it Meghan's rumored attempts to trademark more royal-adjacent language? Was it Harry's memoir, those brutal jabs at William's character, at Kate, at Charles? Or was it something more personal? Something that reminded him not just of duty, but of betrayal? Because the truth is, this wasn't just about a title. It was about trust. Meghan had once been welcomed into the family with open arms. William had reportedly tried to bridge the gap in those early days, despite clear tensions, despite gut feelings. But over time, that goodwill eroded. Not with a bang, but with 1,000 little cuts. Every interview, every passive-aggressive remark, every omission of detail, every Hollywood smile paired with a veiled accusation. William stayed quiet. For years. But now he's speaking. Not with words, but with consequences. And Meghan? She didn't expect this. Her team is scrambling. Her branding strategy is in chaos. Sources say she cried when the letter arrived. Not just because of the restriction, but because of who it came from. Because it came from William. Not Charles. Not an anonymous royal aide. William, the brother of her husband. The man who once stood beside Harry at his wedding. The future king of England. The person she assumed would never cross that line. But he did. And the fallout is only just beginning. Because now, this legal block has triggered a domino effect. Other royals are taking note. International partners are reevaluating. Meghan's own team is reportedly split on how to proceed. Some want to fight. Some want to rebrand. And Harry? He's stuck in the middle. Between the woman he loves and the brother he's never been further from. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this entire situation is what it reveals about modern monarchy. We are watching, in real time, the transformation of royal power, not in the form of pageantry, but in legal filings, brand management, and intellectual property battles. It's not just about waving from balconies anymore. It's about who controls the narrative. And William, in one single move, just made it crystal clear. He controls the legacy. She can't borrow it anymore. But the story doesn't end there. Because while Meghan was reeling from the HRH block, someone else behind the scenes was celebrating. A quiet ally. A royal figure who said very little publicly, but whose fingerprints might be all over this move. Someone Meghan never expected to align with William. And that's where this story twists again. Because if you think this was a one-man operation, you're mistaken. This wasn't just William drawing the line. This was a coordinated, calculated step involving more than one royal player. And the identity of the person who helped William finally slam the door on Meghan's HRH branding? Well, that revelation will shock even the most seasoned royal watchers. Because what comes next isn't just about legal titles. It's about retribution, strategy, and perhaps a long-buried grudge coming back to life. Stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. She wasn't expecting a letter. Not like this. Not wrapped in thick, formal stationery with a royal seal. Not sent directly to the Montecito estate under her name. Not Harry's. Not the Duke and Duchess, but just Meghan. And certainly not with language so cold, so precise, so final. The moment it arrived, it changed everything. It was early morning in California, just before sunrise, when the knock came at the gate. A courier with no words. Just a gloved hand and a signature required. Her assistant didn't even blink until she saw the emblem pressed into the wax seal. Until she read the first line of the letter. That's when she ran. Straight to Meghan's private room. Breathless. Whispering. "It's from Kensington. You need to read this." Now, Meghan, still in silk pajamas, took one glance at the envelope and froze. You could feel the atmosphere change, like the pressure had dropped in the room. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she stared at the crest. That familiar, haunting insignia. The one she thought she had left behind. Why would William send her a letter? Not a WhatsApp message. Not a call. A formal, physical letter? Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. And then silence. She read the first paragraph once. Then again. By the third time, her expression cracked. Her lips tightened. Her eyes blinked hard, like she was trying to hold something back. And then came the breath. Shaky, shallow, sharp. The kind of breath someone takes when they've just been slapped in the face by something they didn't see coming. A single tear welled up, but she brushed it away before it could fall. She didn't want to give the letter that satisfaction. But her assistant saw it. Everyone in that house saw it. Because what the letter said wasn't just a restriction. It was a declaration. From this moment forward, Meghan Markle was legally barred from using the HRH title in any commercial, business, or brand-related activity. No loopholes. No subtle implications. No creative interpretations. The letter cited prior discussions, referenced the late Queen's wishes. It even quoted specific passages from internal royal policies, ones never made public, but devastating in their clarity. And at the bottom of the letter, two names were signed in ink. Prince William. And someone else. But not Charles. We'll get to that. For now, let's focus on Meghan's reaction. Because this moment was years in the making, and no one, not even she, saw the blow coming from this angle. Now, for those watching this thinking, wait, wasn't she already not using HRH? You're right. Publicly, Meghan and Harry stopped using the HRH style back in 2020. That was part of the stepping back deal. But behind the scenes, in filings, in documents, in corporate paperwork lodged in Delaware and the UK, things weren't so clear. Meghan had, over the years, reportedly allowed her name to be referenced with titles in various negotiations. Not directly, not brazenly, but subtly, indirectly, legally non-binding, but symbolically loaded. Why? Because Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, has power. But Her Royal Highness Meghan has value. That prefix? HRH. It's branding gold. It conveys status, exclusivity, legacy. It whispers to investors and corporations, this isn't just another celebrity, this is royalty. The kind that transcends tabloid fame. The kind that comes with centuries of mystique. So imagine Meghan's shock when that door slammed shut. Imagine having your entire post-palace empire structured around your past, and suddenly, someone rewrites the terms of that past. It was a legal kill shot, and William pulled the trigger. Now here's the thing that really burned. The letter wasn't bombastic. It wasn't cruel. It was polite, clinical, so controlled it hurt. Because it meant this wasn't personal emotion. This was strategy. Cold, deliberate, premeditated. That made it sting even more. Her team scrambled. Phones rang within minutes. Lawyers called royal correspondents. Damage control plans were drafted. But the panic wasn't about what was written. It was about who had delivered it. For years, Meghan had assumed that William was passive. Yes, frosty. Yes, distant. But not the one pulling strings. Charles was the strategist. The Queen was the decider. William? He played nice. At least on the surface. So this letter? This direct move from the future king? It sent a message. He is no longer playing nice. And she felt it in her bones. Her first call was to Harry. He didn't answer. He was on a hike. Or maybe he just needed space. When he finally picked up an hour later, Meghan didn't yell. She didn't scream. She read the letter aloud, slowly. Harry was quiet on the other end. Then, just one word. Damn. It wasn't just the content that struck him. It was the fact that it hadn't gone through palace intermediaries. It hadn't been leaked to the press first. It hadn't been accompanied by a PR spin. It had simply arrived. Like a royal verdict. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Meghan's legal team dissected every line. They searched for contradictions, for ambiguities, for possible legal pushback. But there were none. The letter was backed by years of documentation. Internal memos, palace agreements, even references to communications dating back to the Queen's final days. Conversations that, according to insiders, expressed Her Majesty's personal concern over how titles could be exploited. And then, the real blow. That second signature. Remember we said it wasn't Charles? It was someone who hadn't spoken publicly in months. Someone who had, until now, remained out of the Meghan drama. But whose influence within the institution is immense. Princess Anne. Yes, the Princess Royal. She had co-signed the letter alongside William. And that changed everything. Because Anne doesn't do drama. She doesn't leak to the press. She doesn't make Netflix shows or go on podcasts. But she does protect the crown. And her signature on that document sent a chilling message to Meghan's camp. This isn't just about William. This is about all of us. Meghan reportedly went pale when she saw the name. Why would Anne involve herself? Why now? Theories swirled. Some insiders believe and had grown increasingly frustrated with how Meghan's post-royal narrative continued to chip away at the institution's credibility. Others suggest she had long felt Harry and Meghan were treated too softly, and that now, with the Queen gone, it was time to draw the line. But there's a third theory, and this one is explosive. It centers on a private exchange between Meghan and Anne in 2018. A moment during early royal training when Meghan allegedly dismissed Anne's advice as outdated. Anne, who had spent decades refining the tightrope of royal duty, reportedly took offense. And from that day forward, she watched Meghan's moves not with resentment, but with caution. And now, with a signature and a wax seal, she made her move. The HRH block wasn't just a legal measure. It was a message. And Meghan? She knew it. She had underestimated the quiet ones. because William might have been the face of the letter, but Anne, she was the enforcer. Now, ask yourself this. What happens when you build your post-royal identity on the idea of royalty, only for royalty to reject you? What do you become? This is the dilemma Meghan now faces. Her brand isn't just about motherhood or philanthropy or lifestyle blogs. It's about the mystique of monarchy without the rules of monarchy. And William, with one document, tore that foundation apart. But it gets worse, because the HRH block triggered a chain reaction. And one of Meghan's upcoming ventures, a deal worth millions, was already built on outdated assumptions. Assumptions that the title was safe. And when they realized it wasn't, let's just say, phones started ringing on both sides of the Atlantic. Because a clause buried deep in that contract required immediate reassessment. And Meghan's team? They knew they were running out of time. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does a war look like when it's fought with silence? No banners, no declarations, no armies, just strategy, precision, and one man who's waited years to make his move. That's how Prince William fights. And Meghan? She never realized she was in his crosshairs until the final blow had already landed. Because unlike the tabloid spectacle she's grown used to, William's war wasn't waged in public. It unfolded in the shadows, in quiet meetings behind oak-paneled doors, in whispered briefings between legal teams, in subtle conversations over polished mahogany tables at Clarence House and Kensington Palace. No raised voices, no headlines, no drama, just cold, quiet resolve. But let's rewind. Let's trace the path of this so-called quiet war. Because it didn't start with the HRH ban. It started with a question. A question William kept asking himself again and again, long before the Megxit chaos, before the Oprah interviews, before the Netflix specials and tell-all books. That question, how do you defend the monarchy from someone who used to be part of it? And the answer, he discovered, wasn't in retaliation. It wasn't in counterattacks. It wasn't even in press statements. It was in restraint, in waiting, in studying patterns, in knowing that eventually the other side would overplay their hand. And that's exactly what Meghan did. Because while the world watched her redefine what it meant to be a modern duchess, William watched the legal trail. He wasn't obsessed with the noise. He was focused on the paperwork, the filings, the trademarks, the brand registrations, the quietly evolving digital footprint of Meghan's post-royal empire. It started small, a few inconsistencies here and there, mentions of royal lineage in brand decks, global humanitarian work as part of the royal family in business proposals. Subtle, clever, not illegal, but not appropriate either. Then came the larger moves. Trademark attempts for archetypes, Archewell, Sussex Royal, even after the palace had publicly stated those names could no longer be used in commerce. Meghan's camp pushed forward anyway, and that's when William's quiet war began in earnest. Because while the public believed the palace was simply ignoring it, William was building a case, not in court. In principle, he kept receipts, notes, legal commentary, dates. He worked with key advisors, some inherited from his father, some loyal only to him. And through it all, he said nothing. Because silence is powerful. It creates mystery. It makes people underestimate you. And Meghan? She underestimated him. She assumed William was too soft, too traditional, too PR trained to ever confront her directly. After all, Charles was the tactician. And the enforcer. The queen, the gatekeeper. William? He was the golden boy. The family man. The peacemaker. Until he wasn't. There was a moment, months before the HRH letter was sent, when everything shifted. A private call between William and an inner circle advisor. The advisor warned that one of Meghan's upcoming business ventures included branding that implied royal endorsement, despite clear agreements to the contrary. William's response: for words, then we stop it. And just like that, the war escalated. Not with fury, but with coordination. William didn't issue public threats. He convened meetings. He consulted attorneys who understood both royal tradition and international intellectual property law. He met with palace aides who had served under the Queen for decades, people who had seen royal crises come and go, who understood how to maneuver without making a sound. And then he did something else. Something that made this quiet war far more dangerous for Meghan than any media feud. He brought in Princess Anne, and the most respected and least indulgent of all the senior royals, and who had warned, as far back as 2019, that the family was being too soft on the Sussexes, and who once told a courtier, "You don't get to be half in and half out." Her alliance with William changed the game. Because while William had the power of public perception and had the institutional weight of tradition, she is the monarch's shadow, and if she signed on, there would be no turning back. Together, they reviewed months of documentation, cross-checked agreements made during the 2020 Sandringham Summit, analyzed Meghan's public comments against her private filings. It was surgical. And then, the final step, drafting the letter. William insisted it be direct, but not cruel, firm, but respectful. There would be no accusations, no insults, no emotional language, just facts and boundaries, because William wasn't just making a legal point. He was reclaiming something, the dignity of the monarchy, the legacy of his grandmother, the symbolic line between being born royal and profiting from it. So when the letter was sent to Montecito, William wasn't pacing a hallway or wringing his hands. He was in a quiet room at Kensington Palace, reviewing an unrelated briefing, drinking tea. Because for him, the war was over. He had won, without fanfare, without scandal, without even speaking. But here's the part no one talks about. This decision broke something in William. Because while he didn't show it, this wasn't easy. It wasn't a chess move. It was a sacrifice. Harry was his brother. Meghan was once part of the family. And to go this far, to shut a door so firmly it could never be reopened, that took a toll. Insiders say William spent a full day alone after the letter went out. No staff, no aides, just him. And Kate? She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Because she knew. She had been the silent witness to every twist of this family drama. She had watched William stay quiet, stay noble, stay restrained, while the narrative twisted around them. And when he finally acted, she didn't say, "Well done." She just said, "It's time." But even Kate didn't know what was coming next. Because while the HRH letter felt like the end, it was just the beginning. Because Meghan? She wasn't going down without a fight. And one of her biggest business partners, already committed to a major project, had just received the same letter, the same restrictions, and they weren't happy. Phone calls were made, deals were threatened, and one clause, buried deep in Meghan's multi-million-dollar contract, was now causing panic in boardrooms from LA to London. A clause that said, if the Duchess is restricted from referencing her former royal status, then the contract could be reconsidered, cancelled, even clawed back. And that's when Meghan's camp realized William's quiet war wasn't about titles. It was about timing, because the letter hadn't just arrived randomly. It had arrived days before a critical announcement, an announcement Meghan had been planning for months, a new initiative, a new brand, a public-facing platform that leaned heavily on the legacy of her royal past. And now, that entire rollout was in jeopardy. But what Meghan didn't know yet was that William's team had seen it coming, because someone on the inside had tipped them off. And that insider? Their identity would shatter Meghan's trust in one of her closest allies. Because this war? It wasn't over. Not even close. She said she didn't care about titles. She said they meant nothing. That her worth wasn't defined by royal labels or aristocratic initials. That she didn't need an HRH to change the world. But behind closed doors, her team treated those three letters, Her Royal Highness, like pure gold. Because the truth is, Meghan Markle was obsessed. Not in the way tabloids might exaggerate, but in the way powerful people get obsessed with leverage, with image, with optics. And the HRH title? It wasn't just a name. It was currency, a passport to elite rooms, high-stakes deals, and seven-figure contracts. Even without using it publicly, the idea of HRH Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, gave her access. It framed her. It elevated her above other celebrities, made her more than just a former actress or podcaster or philanthropist. It made her royal adjacent, which, in branding terms, is priceless. Now here's where things get interesting. From the moment Meghan and Harry stepped back from royal duties in early 2020, a quiet agreement was reached. They could retain their HRH styles, but would not actively use them. Simple, right? Not exactly. Because the word actively left the door wide open. And Meghan? She found every possible way to keep that door slightly ajar. She didn't use the title in interviews. She didn't put it on business cards, but in trademarks, in behind-the-scenes documents, in internal presentations to potential partners. It appeared, sometimes as a footnote, sometimes as a brief bio line, former HRH Duchess of Sussex. Other times, even more discreetly, royal background, senior royal family member, British monarchy figure. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even explicitly deceptive, but it was intentional, calculated, because perception is power, and Meghan understood branding better than anyone in the royal family ever had. Remember, she wasn't born into this. She didn't grow up with titles and tiaras. She built her career on image, positioning, and strategic storytelling. Suits, Hollywood, activism, the blog, the fashion deals. Every chapter of her life had been curated, edited, packaged. So when the title Duchess of Sussex was added to her name, she knew exactly how much it was worth, and she wasn't going to let go of it easily. In 2021, internal emails between Meghan's U.S. legal team and a branding consultant surfaced in legal circles. Nothing leaked to the public yet, but they revealed a quiet effort to solidify her long-term brand as both Meghan Markle and the Duchess. No HRH in the headline, but always there in the background, just out of reach, just enough to evoke mystique. One of those branding memos even included a chilling line. People are fascinated with royalty. We don't need to say HRH. We just need to remind them that she was. Let that sink in. She didn't need the crown to wear it. She just needed people to remember it. Now let's talk about the financials. Because every brand deal Meghan entered after 2020 had something in common. An implicit connection to her royal status. Netflix didn't sign a $100 million deal with just another former actress. Spotify didn't jump at the chance to distribute a podcast just because of her social commentary. These were legacy plays. Meghan represented something deeper, an aura of monarchy with the freedom of celebrity. But here's the contradiction. The very thing she had rebelled against, the titles, the formality, the rigidity of royal life, was the exact thing keeping her brand afloat. And the more she tried to distance herself publicly, the more quietly dependent she became behind the scenes. It's the paradox no one wanted to admit. Not even Harry. But you know who did notice? William. He saw it happening in real time. He watched the Netflix trailers, the Oprah clips, the Time magazine covers. He noticed how every narrative arc relied on one thing. Her transformation from outsider to duchess to exile. She was still profiting off the system, without playing by the rules. And that's when the quiet monitoring began. Every trademark Meghan's team filed in the UK or US was flagged. Every business venture that referenced Sussex, royal, or monarchy in any form was reviewed. By 2022, multiple red flags had been logged by Kensington Palace aides. And then came the turning point. A leaked internal brand deck, presented to a European luxury conglomerate, reportedly included phrasing like HRH-level legacy brand, uniquely positioned at the intersection of royalty and wellness. That deck triggered alarm bells. It wasn't public. It wasn't illegal. But it confirmed something William had feared for months. Meghan had not moved on from the title. She had built an empire on its ghost. And that ghost was getting bolder. Now let's get personal for a second. Imagine being Prince William. Imagine watching your grandmother, the Queen, spend 70 years preserving the dignity of a monarchy, only to have that legacy blurred in business pitches overseas. Imagine having to explain to your children why their aunt and uncle still get to be royal in name, while the rest of the family shoulders the burden of silence. Imagine trying to hold together a fragile institution while it's being mined, piece by piece, for content. This wasn't just branding. It was betrayal. And William had had enough. But Meghan? She was still moving forward. Because while the HRH letters had been technically untouched, her team had devised clever workarounds. One internal document revealed a plan for a new initiative, codenamed Project Wisteria, that included partnerships with companies that believed they were working with a senior British royal figure. The project was meant to be Meghan's comeback moment. A multi-platform launch, streaming, lifestyle, philanthropy, but at the center of it all, the unspoken title. That's why the HRH block hit so hard. It didn't just stop her from using those three letters. It shattered the foundation of what was next. Suddenly, her name couldn't be suggested to carry royal weight in legal agreements. Suddenly, advisors had to rework language across brand contracts, media kits, and promotional content. Suddenly, Meghan was no longer Her Royal Highness in exile. She was just Meghan. And for someone who built an empire on perception, that was a death blow. Now here's where things get even murkier. Because sources close to Meghan say she genuinely didn't see it this way. To her, she was honoring the position, reminding the world that she had earned that title, that it was part of her story, not just a marketing tool. She wasn't exploiting it. She was owning it. And maybe that's true. Maybe she believed it. But William didn't. And the monarchy? It doesn't operate on interpretation. It operates on control. Control of names, symbols, titles, narratives. And the HRH title, while stripped of function, still mattered symbolically, especially to the British public. To them, it represented a sacred trust. To see it drifting into corporate documents, it wasn't just inappropriate. It was dangerous. So when William acted, he wasn't acting out of pettiness. He was protecting the firewall. The same firewall the Queen had upheld for decades. The same firewall and had enforced with military precision. The HRH obsession wasn't just Meghan's. It was everyone else's too. Because the public wanted the fantasy. The press wanted the scandal. And Meghan? She was caught somewhere in the middle, trying to tell her story, trying to heal old wounds, trying to build something new, but still clinging, just slightly, to the crown she had walked away from. Until the crown said, no more. But the blowback from William's letter didn't stop with Meghan's team. It reached her business partners, and one of them was about to pull out. Because buried in the fine print of a brand collaboration was a clause that would turn everything upside down. A clause that said, any significant change in royal designation shall be grounds for termination of contract. And that clause had just been triggered. He thought he could smooth things over. He thought one phone call, one calm voice, one fatherly intervention might be enough. But King Charles was wrong. Because by the time he stepped in, the damage had already been done. And Meghan? She wasn't looking for mediation anymore. She was looking for answers. For years, Charles had walked a diplomatic tightrope, juggling his duties as a monarch, his legacy as a father, and the relentless emotional warfare between his sons. It wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. But he tried. And for a time, it worked. Even after Megxit, Charles believed the family would eventually circle back. He spoke in metaphors during interviews. He kept Harry and Meghan's portraits in the drawing room at Clarence House long after they'd left. He made quiet donations to causes they supported. He told staff to avoid incendiary language when briefing the press. But now that William had taken decisive legal action, blocking Meghan from using HRH in any commercial context, Charles was in a corner. Because this wasn't just a brotherly rift anymore. It was a constitutional line in the sand. And Charles, despite his personal regrets, had to protect the monarchy. Still, he made the call. He picked up the phone. Not to Harry, to Meghan. It was early evening in London, early morning in California. The skies were gray on both sides of the Atlantic. And when Meghan answered, after several ignored calls from unknown numbers, Charles simply said, Meghan, we need to talk. There was a pause. She recognized the voice instantly. And while she didn't hang up, she didn't say anything either. Not at first. Charles, ever the statesman, filled the silence. I wanted to speak to you directly. Not through advisors. Not through lawyers. Another pause. And then, softly, is this about the letter? A beat passed. Then Meghan, in a tone that was more restrained than hurt, replied, no, this is about trust. Charles exhaled. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. He had hoped that by calling, he could explain the reasoning behind William's move. That this wasn't personal. That it wasn't an attack. That the monarchy simply had to draw clear lines in the age of streaming deals and billion-dollar brand licensing. But Meghan wasn't having it. She listened, politely, coolly, but with unmistakable distance. Because to her, this wasn't just about royal precedent. It was about timing. And the fact that William's HRH block came just days before her new initiative was set to launch, that wasn't a coincidence. That was a calculated strike. And the king, whether he agreed with it or not, he had allowed it. That's when her voice changed. She didn't raise it, but she didn't hide the emotion anymore either. I've never used the title commercially, she said. I've respected every agreement made after we stepped back." Charles tried to interject, to say that perception matters just as much as legality. But Meghan continued, "I've been painted as this manipulative outsider for years. And now, when I finally try to build something positive, something meaningful." She trailed off. And then came the line that hit Charles harder than anything else. Was the Queen's word not enough? Boom. There it was. Because according to multiple sources close to both camps, Meghan believed that the late Queen Elizabeth had given personal assurances, however informal, that she and Harry would always be treated with respect, that their titles would never be stripped or publicly challenged. And while that may not have been an official legal agreement, to Meghan, it meant something. It was a promise. And now, William's move had shattered it. Charles, clearly pained, reminded her that his mother's wishes were always taken seriously. But the institution had to evolve. It had to protect its integrity, even if that meant making difficult decisions, even if those decisions hurt. Especially now, with William preparing to step into greater leadership, with the Commonwealth in flux, with the media's obsession with every royal misstep. "We're not just a family," Charles said. "We're a symbol, and we have to act accordingly." That didn't land well, because to Meghan, that's always been the problem. They stopped being people and became symbols. And as she saw it, the only people punished for that were her and Harry. Charles tried again. He softened. "I understand you're upset. I do. I know this isn't what you imagined. But there are forces at play, rules we can't always bend." Meghan, sharp but still composed, replied, "You mean rules that only apply to me?" That was the real tension, the double standard. The thing no one ever said aloud, but she felt in every headline, every snub, every carefully worded statement from the palace. Other royals made mistakes. Others leveraged influence. Others found ways to capitalize on their status. But when Meghan did it, it became scandal. And now, with the HRH title officially barred from all commercial usage, it felt like the final rejection. The final message: you were never really one of us. Charles, sensing the emotion, took a softer approach. "Let me speak to William," he said. "Perhaps there's a way forward. Perhaps we can find language that isn't so harsh." But Meghan wasn't asking for compromise. Not anymore. She wanted accountability. "Why now?" she asked. "Why block it right before my announcement? Why wait 3 years, and then do this now?" Charles didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, he didn't know. Or maybe he did, but didn't want to say it, because the timing was precise. And while William hadn't publicly declared war, his decision to send that letter mere days before Meghan's major launch, that wasn't accidental. That was surgical. Charles knew his eldest son. He knew how William operated. And in that silence, Meghan got her answer. She said thank you, politely. She told Charles she appreciated the call. But then she said, "It's too late," and ended the call. That silence on Charles's end? It lasted long after the line went dead. Because now he knew. This wasn't just a family wound anymore. It was a political fracture. And it wouldn't heal with polite calls or private reassurances. Especially when Meghan's team, already furious, was preparing a response. Not through lawyers, not through letters, but through a platform where Meghan had complete control. Her voice, her camera, her truth. But what no one expected was who Meghan reached out to next. Because in the midst of this fallout, with the world watching and the monarchy holding its breath, Meghan placed a call to someone who once turned their back on her. Someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. And that conversation would change everything. What happens when your entire empire is built on a name you can no longer use? What do you do when the very foundation of your brand, your identity, is pulled out from under you by the family that gave it to you? That's the question Meghan Markle faced in the days following Prince William's brutal HRH block. Because Archewell wasn't just a foundation. It wasn't just a website with inspirational quotes and vague corporate language. It was a calculated, high-stakes attempt to carve out a new monarchy, one Meghan and Harry could control. And for a while, it worked. The Archewell name became synonymous with modern royalty, philanthropy, media, storytelling, impact. It was Meghan and Harry's answer to the traditional royal machine, sleek, American, values-driven. But beneath the polished branding, there was always one undeniable truth. It only existed because of their titles, because of their status, because Meghan was still the Duchess of Sussex, with or without the HRH. And Meghan knew it. That's what made this next move so shocking. Just days after Charles's failed phone call, and less than a week after William's legal hammer dropped, Meghan called an emergency meeting with her branding and legal team. On the agenda, the future of Archewell. Her voice, according to one insider, was measured but volatile. She asked questions no one in that room was prepared to answer. Do we scrap the name? Do we sue? Do we go public? And then, after a long silence, she asked the question everyone feared. Did I overplay this? That's the thing about Meghan. She's self-aware. Painfully so. She reads the press. She tracks perception. She knows how things look, even if she doesn't agree with how they're spun. And in that moment, with William's letter sitting in a folder and Archewell's next phase hanging in the balance, she was forced to confront something she had long avoided. Had the pursuit of royal-adjacent influence become arrogance? Let's be clear. Archewell was never a scam. It wasn't a vanity project. It was built with intention, with effort, with real money and real ambition. But it was also built with a delicate assumption that the royal family wouldn't fight back, that they'd remain too polite, too cautious, too traditional to ever say what they were really thinking. That assumption was now dead. William had changed the rules. And Archewell, designed as a soft power extension of Meghan and Harry's post-royal image, was suddenly in crisis. Here's why. Buried in several of Archewell's earlier U.S. trademark filings were references to royal associations. Not direct use of the HRH title, but phrases like, founded by members of the British royal family, driven by the vision of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, combining royal legacy with modern storytelling. All clever, all slippery, all legally gray. And now, with William's team publicly formalizing restrictions, that gray zone was being audited by both regulators and business partners. Multiple emails were reportedly sent to Archewell's board from concerned stakeholders. One media investor wanted clarification on whether the title could still be referenced in future promotional campaigns. Another philanthropic partner asked if future projects would be able to evoke royal ties, or if that too was off the table. Meghan's team had no answers. And worse, one internal document revealed that several future projects, including branded documentaries and educational initiatives, relied on that unspoken royal aura. They weren't sold on Meghan Markle, the actress. They were sold on Meghan Markle, the Duchess. Without that mystique, the value proposition changed significantly, and Meghan knew it. So did Harry. Sources say the two had a private conversation the night after her Archewell war room meeting. Not an argument, but an emotionally charged reckoning. Harry was torn. He wanted to protect her, defend her, fight the system that he believed had always judged her unfairly. But he also knew, deep down, that William's move wasn't random, that it was the inevitable response to a years-long branding campaign that had blurred too many lines. At one point, Meghan allegedly asked Harry a question that cut to the bone. Do you think I've embarrassed you? His answer? A quiet, heartbreaking, no. But I think we didn't see the storm coming. And that storm was about to get worse. Because even as Meghan was processing the Archewell fallout, a second shoe was preparing to drop. Spotify. Remember the Archetypes podcast? The one that began with Oprah-tier buzz and ended in awkward silence. It was more than just a one-off media project. It was supposed to be the cornerstone of Meghan's new narrative, a duchess redefined as a global thought leader. But behind the scenes, Spotify executives had grown wary. Meghan's HRH-adjacent identity had been part of the platform's brand leverage. They didn't sell her as a podcaster. They sold her as a royal speaking out. And now, that framing was legally restricted. Within days of William's letter, Spotify's legal department quietly reviewed their previous agreements with Archewell Audio. And what they found was a clause that allowed for retraction of brand support if the subject's formal designation within the British royal family changed in a way that impacted public perception. In other words, if Meghan was no longer seen as royalty, they could back out. They could claw back. And reportedly, they considered it. Hard. Emails flew across the Atlantic. Meghan's legal team pushed back, saying that nothing had technically changed, that her title remained legally intact, that William's restrictions were commercial, not constitutional. But perception isn't just legal. It's psychological. And Spotify, like every other major media brand, cares more about optics than accuracy. Meghan had gone from a duchess on the outs to a duchess on a deadline. And archetypes? Its second season was now in limbo. One insider described the boardroom mood as tense and uncertain. Another was blunter. She built her brand on royalty, and then royalty pulled the rug. Meanwhile, Archewell's own staff were losing faith. Internal Slack messages, later leaked, showed confusion, frustration, and a growing sense that Meghan's insistence on holding onto the Duchess identity had backfired. And in that chaos, Meghan did something no one saw coming. She called Doria, her mother, her anchor, her quiet compass in moments of emotional hurricane. The conversation, according to those briefed afterward, was simple, raw, honest. And in it, Meghan said something she hadn't admitted to anyone else. I think I need to let go of the title. But before Doria could respond, before any decision could be made, a new complication arrived. One that would make everything even messier. Because while Meghan was questioning her own branding strategy, William's team had discovered something. A new trademark, filed just months earlier, by someone inside Meghan's business circle. And it used the word royal in a way that directly violated the new restrictions. The filing had been kept quiet, strategically timed, but now it was exposed, and that document would become the smoking gun, the proof Williams' team needed to escalate the situation from legal disagreement to full-on confrontation. And this time, even Charles couldn't stop what was coming. They thought it would win awards. They thought it would shift the global conversation. A powerful, personal narrative, cinematic shots, emotional interviews, a royal reckoning told in their own words. But when Harry and Meghan dropped on Netflix, it nearly blew the whole thing up. Not the monarchy, the Sussex brand. Because while the docuseries triggered global headlines, meme storms, and public debates, it also lit a match under a long simmering fire. One that had been quietly burning behind closed doors at Netflix headquarters. And after Williams' HRH block letter arrived, the embers finally erupted into a full-on corporate crisis. Let's break it down. When Meghan made that private phone call after Kate's silent strike, she didn't reach out to a lawyer. She called a former Netflix executive, a longtime acquaintance from her Suits days, now a consultant on high-level content strategy. Someone who owed her a favor. The purpose of the call? To get ahead of the storm. Meghan knew that Williams' HRH restriction didn't just change her branding. It changed how her past work was perceived, especially the Netflix deal. Why? Because the entire pitch for the original docuseries had centered around her unique royal lens. She and Harry had sold the idea as an insider account. Not gossip, not drama, but legacy, perspective, authenticity. Their angle? They weren't just public figures. They were royal insiders who had lived through a revolution from within. That angle sold. Big time. Netflix reportedly greenlit the project for over $100 million, with early plans including multiple documentary spin-offs, a children's series, and philanthropic tie-ins. But once Williams' letter legally blocked Meghan from using the HRH title in any commercial context, Netflix's legal team panicked. Because buried in the fine print of their agreement with Archewell Productions was a clause most fans never knew about. A clause that stated, any retroactive change to the subject's formal royal designation, title, or status must be disclosed and re-evaluated for brand integrity. In other words, if Meghan's royal identity changed, even unofficially, Netflix had the right to reassess the entire deal. And that's exactly what they started doing. Legal memos flew. Quiet meetings were held. One insider revealed. The question became, did we sell this as a royal documentary, and now it's not? And worse, viewership data was coming in. The first 2 episodes had shattered expectations. But by episode 4, the numbers had dipped. Hard. Critics were divided. Audiences felt sympathy fatigue. And royal insiders were furious, especially over the way William and Kate were portrayed. Grainy reenactments. Awkward footage. Loaded accusations. William had said nothing publicly. But behind palace walls, there was outrage. And in streaming boardrooms, there was concern. Because here's what you have to understand about Netflix. They don't just care about subscribers. They care about credibility. And when it looked like the Sussex content was leaning more toward reality TV than royal insight, credibility was on the line. So when William's letter arrived, officially limiting Meghan's use of the HRH in commerce? Netflix saw it as a legal red flag and a PR landmine. Executives wanted to know, was the Sussex brand still viable? Could they continue marketing content as from a royal perspective? Would future seasons invite legal scrutiny? That's when Meghan's quiet favor call turned into something much bigger. The former exec she contacted connected her with internal decision-makers, people she hadn't spoken to since the first wave of production. And the tone? Frosty. Polite, yes, but cautious, distant, strategic. They weren't looking for another glossy docuseries anymore. They were looking for risk mitigation. One source who attended that call said, they didn't say the brand was dead, but they made it clear, Duchess isn't a genre. And that stung. Because for Meghan, the Netflix deal wasn't just a paycheck. It was vindication. It was proof that her story mattered. That her voice, once silenced by palace protocol, could now be heard by millions. And now? It felt like that voice was being muted all over again. But it got worse. Because while Netflix reconsidered future collaborations, one internal audit uncovered something awkward. A promotional blurb from the original press release referred to Meghan as Her Royal Highness, after the 2020 agreement had been made. Technically, it wasn't Meghan's doing. The wording had come from a third-party marketing team. But under the new restrictions issued by William, even that phrasing could trigger scrutiny. Lawyers flagged it. Emails were exchanged. One exec reportedly asked, could this be considered unauthorized use under the new guidelines? The answer? Unclear. But no one wanted to find out the hard way, which led to a chilling conclusion. If the HRH restriction was retroactive, Netflix might be forced to quietly delist or rebrand parts of the original series. Imagine that. A $100 million documentary being edited after the fact because a future king drew the line. It was unprecedented. But Meghan, to her credit, tried to stay calm. She assured her contact that she was committed to honoring all new legal agreements. She claimed she never authorized HRH usage in promo copy. She expressed frustration, not at Netflix, but at the palace. They keep moving the goalposts, she reportedly said. But even as she fought to hold ground, one thing was becoming obvious. The narrative was shifting, fast, because now, instead of seeing Meghan as the brave outsider who spoke truth to power, media insiders were starting to whisper another word. Liability. Not malicious, but messy, complicated, unpredictable. And in Hollywood, that's the kiss of death, especially when the royal family has the power to, at any moment, rewrite the rules. And the public? They were watching. Social media exploded with debate over William's move, the HRH fallout, and the Netflix implications. Hashtag royal rights trended. So did hashtag Meghan Markle loses title. And, more worryingly, so did hashtag Don Tiranu Netflix. The Sussexes had always been polarizing. But now, the platform that had bet big on them was quietly backing away. And Meghan? She saw it coming. That's why she made a bold decision. One that shocked even Harry. She wanted to go public. Not with a lawsuit. Not with an Instagram post. But with a reframed story. She didn't want to talk about the HRH. She wanted to talk about freedom, reinvention, identity, womanhood. She wanted to flip the script from royal victim to post-royal phoenix. And she had just the platform to do it. A brand new public speaking tour, high-profile venues, feminist panels, global empowerment summits, and a keynote speech titled, What We Keep and What We Leave Behind. The audience would hang on her every word. The press would dissect every sentence. And the monarchy would be watching. Because this wasn't just a PR comeback. It was a message. And what she said in that speech would ignite a firestorm across the UK, the US, and inside the palace itself. Because Meghan Markle was about to answer William's letter. Not with ink, but with a microphone. They thought American law would protect her. They thought US soil meant UK rules no longer applied. But when Prince William slammed the brakes on Meghan's use of Her Royal Highness in any business venture, American lawyers were left staring at a problem they never anticipated. British monarchy doesn't play by Hollywood rules, and Meghan's empire was built on assumptions. Assumptions that suddenly cracked. Let's set the scene. After the Netflix backlash and the media frenzy surrounding Meghan's upcoming speaking tour, her legal team in California kicked into overdrive. Emails flew. Emergency Zooms were scheduled. And at the center of it all was a question that had no clear answer. Can they actually enforce this here? Because while William's letter held weight in the UK, where royal protocols are written into centuries of precedent, in the United States, titles like HRH aren't protected the same way. There's no constitutional law barring someone from calling themselves Duke or Duchess or Her Royal Highness in the States. You can legally be Queen of your kitchen on LinkedIn, and no one can stop you. So Meghan's lawyers initially believed they had a lifeline, that the HRH restriction, while emotionally damaging, couldn't actually interfere with her American-based trademarks, brand launches, or appearances. But that belief collapsed fast, because William's team hadn't just sent a polite warning. They had quietly coordinated with international legal advisors, specialists in trademark jurisdiction, cross-border commerce, and reputational risk management. And those advisors had already begun notifying US-based companies of the legal risks of associating their products with Meghan's royal identity. Not in threatening tones, but in a language corporations understand fluently. Liability exposure. That changed everything. Suddenly, Meghan's team was getting blindsided, not by palace lawyers, but by American brands she was already working with. One luxury skincare label reached out to Meghan's reps with a single line. Our lawyers recommend we remove any mention of royal titles from your page copy, effective immediately. Another lifestyle sponsor asked, is the Duchess still appropriate in our marketing? We need assurance from counsel. Meghan was livid, because this wasn't about legality anymore. It was about perception, fear, chilling effect. William had done something no one expected. He had turned her allies into his enforcers. Even without legal power in the US, the optics were too risky for many American firms to ignore. They didn't want to be the ones accidentally infringing on something that could invite lawsuits from across the pond, or even just tabloid blowback. And then came the worst call of all, from one of Meghan's lead US attorneys. He was calm, professional, but brutally honest. He told her, we can fight this. We can argue First Amendment. We can claim public figure rights. But the reality is, the tide is turning. Brands don't want noise. They want clean partnerships. And then he said the sentence that made Meghan go silent. Even if we win legally, we lose commercially. Boom. Because that's the catch. 22 of celebrity legal battles. Winning in court means nothing if you lose your sponsors. And Meghan? She built her post-royal brand on trust. On being credible, respectable, safe. The moment lawyers get involved in that narrative, deals start to dissolve. So what did Meghan do? She pivoted. Fast. She told her US legal team to hold fire. No lawsuits. No cease and desist letters to the palace. No public legal threats. Instead, she ordered a total scrub down. Her American lawyers were tasked with auditing every single contract, website, press release, and public-facing asset tied to her business. If HRH was even hinted at, remove it. If Duchess of Sussex was being used in ways that implied current royal function, reword it. The instructions were clear. Make sure we don't give them anything to weaponize. It was damage control disguised as compliance. But deep down, Meghan knew she was losing the upper hand. And Harry? He felt it too. Because while he wasn't directly involved in the Archewell branding, the ripple effects were hitting him just as hard. His own projects, memoirs, production pitches, speaking engagements, were starting to face quiet skepticism from buyers and platforms. One publishing insider leaked a bombshell email from an executive at a major US media outlet. The email read, is Harry still technically a royal? Or does this HRH drama change how we position his next book? Think about that. A question no one was asking 2 years ago was now at the center of million-dollar decisions. And all because William played a long, silent game and won. But the American lawyers weren't done yet. One sharp-eyed associate, reviewing past filings, uncovered something that sent chills through Meghan's team. A pending U.S. trademark application for a brand name loosely connected to one of Meghan's upcoming lifestyle products did include reference to former HRH title holder. It was buried in the documentation, filed months earlier. Forgotten. But now it was a time bomb. If that filing went public, especially after the HRH restriction, it could make Meghan look defiant, dishonest, even litigious. And worse, it could be used by the palace to claim she had violated the spirit of their agreement. The American legal team acted quickly. They filed an amendment. Quietly, without a press release. They removed the problematic phrase and flagged it for internal legal review. But the leak had already happened. Someone, possibly within the filing office, possibly from a firm once associated with Meghan's branding team, leaked the original version of the trademark filing to a tabloid. And within 48 hours, it was headline news. Meghan tried to sneak an HRH reference in new U.S. trademark. Was it technically true? Not really. Was it catastrophic PR? Absolutely. Because now the British press had proof. And Meghan's American legal team? They were playing defense on two fronts, reputation and regulation. One lawyer reportedly quit the case entirely. Another requested to move to a background advisory role. Meghan's inner circle was shrinking. And Harry? He was getting desperate. That's when he made his phone call. To his father. To the king. Not to apologize, but to negotiate. Because the American lawyers had told him the unthinkable. If we don't secure formal clarity from Buckingham on where Meghan's boundaries are, some of these contracts could collapse. So Harry called Charles. And what happened on that call would send ripples through both households. Because this time, Charles didn't play the diplomat.